Ever thought a tractor could get under your skin? These machines were built to make life easier, but some turned into a nightmare for farmers. From impossible to start engines to dangerous tipping issues, we're diving into the 10 most frustrating tractors in history, and some of these flaws are truly unbelievable. 10. Fordson Model F, a revolutionary disaster. Henry Ford hitched up the world of agriculture with the Fordson Model F, the first mass-produced tractor. It revolutionized small farms by being potent, but also pocket-friendly. A boon to agriculture, it has caused farmers headaches of the worst kinds too. One of its most irritating things? It tipped forward at alarming angles. As a somewhat larger and higher center of gravity truck, together with a narrow wheelbase, it was, therefore, built dangerously unstable under heavy loads. Farmers regularly fought to keep this thing balanced. In the worst cases, it flipped and caused serious injuries or fatalities. Then there was its ignition system, which was something else in cold weather. The Fordson Model F was not, however, able to be fired at all under those conditions. Unlike settled practice with most modern tractors, where starting is done with a mere turn of a key, the Fordson Model F was hand-cranked. And if you've ever had to crank an old car into starting on a 0-degree morning, picture doing it for a massive hunk of steel that is the size of a flywheel. Many farmers would spend hours cranking and sweating in the Arctic just to get their tractors going. Some would even end up breaking their arms from the crank kickback. It still was a revolution in the economy, though. The field-proved tractors can be manufactured on production lines. Thus, they could be afforded by small-scale farmers. It taught, however, another very important lesson: machine is only as good as its design. And so far, that design does not show any great promise. 9. Farmall Regular, the bone-shaking gamble. During the 1920s on into the 1930s, the Farmall Regular was a revolutionary piece of equipment. One of the very first row crop tractors, it allowed farmers to work between the rows of their crops. This truly changed the course of American agriculture. Still, with the good came the bad, some of which made operating it seem like a gamble with your safety. The tricycle front-end design was problematic. While it aided in the mobility through row crops, it made the tractor unstable as it went over uneven terrain. A slight dip in the field or jerky turn could mean serious trouble. 1 minute on the tractor, the next minute, the farmer finds himself on the ground as the tractor tips over. Many farmers learned this the hard way, and rollover became a common and deadly problem. And then there was the ride, or lack of it. If you wanted to know what it felt like to sit on a jackhammer for hours, the Farmall Regular could surely provide you with the experience. No suspension, steel wheels bump, and every rut in the field rang back into the operator's bones as hammers. Farmers went home at the end of the day, not only exhausted but bruised and sore from the unrelenting vibration. Then, if this was not bad enough, there was the magneto ignition with its famous trouble with moisture. In damp weather, it would fail, leaving the farmer stranded with a non-startable machine. Farmall Regular had patience and determination tested during periods of high humidity or early morning dew. It had its problems, but it also went on to mold the face of farming. The headaches it gave to its operators are as memorable as the crops it helped them produce. 8. John Deere Model D, a workhorse with a stubborn streak. Introduced in 1923, the John Deere Model D was one of the first mass-produced tractors from the company. Designed to be powerful and all-purpose, it quickly found a place in American farming. True, it was able to do the hardest of chores, but it also had some quirks that tried the patience of farmers. By far, the hardest thing to do was to start this beast. The Model D was a very difficult tractor to start on. The various personnel involved would not just climb on the seat and turn the ignition key. That required choke and spark adjustments. But even those did not always pay off. For this reason alone, farmers did spend quite some time, more so than they wanted to, getting the engine to run. Cold weather did not help the situation. Some would even have to resort to heating the intake manifold with a torch to get it to awaken. Then came the transmission that never worked. Shifting was out of the question, smooth or otherwise. It was a two-step act, double clutching, disengaging the clutch twice just to get from one gear to the next. Very irritating. It delayed work and made the tractor seem like more of a bother than it was worth. And if that were not bad enough, Driving the Model D was painful because of agonizing vibration at certain speeds. Farmers had to cope with numb hands and sore backs after long hours of sitting in that seat. It was even said that this dreadfully intense shaking kept loosening bolts and fasteners. In other words, this tractor rattled itself apart over the years. The Model D, no doubt, put John Deere into the limelight, but for the man who saw it through every day, it also stood as a reminder that a great workhorse can be stubborn and more than a handful. 7. Alice Chalmers Model WC, a bumpy ride with a mean kickback. The Alice Chalmers Model WC was introduced in the 1930s and became a lifesaver during the Great Depression. It was cheap, reliable for the time, and brought mechanized farming to thousands of poor farmers. However, that same popularity could not attach any attributes of perfection. That was far from the truth. One of the biggest nightmares for operators was the hand crank starting method. WC tractors were not changed with the new toys of electric starters. The crank conveyed a life of its own, sometimes resulting in a vicious kickback if not engaged at the right angle. Farmers were oftentimes found nursing bruised hands, sprained wrists, or even much worse after an ill-timed crank. This led those brave enough to risk some injury while trying to start the tractor, which was, in all fairness, not the easiest way to earn a living. Then there was the wiry steering, whose tendencies became outright erratic once speed started to stack. The WC was supposed to be a nimble and lightweight tractor, but there was a price to pay for that nimbleness. The steering felt wobbly and twitchy, especially with a full load or on bumpy ground. Some farmers even reported almost losing control of a tractor that was in constant need of attention. Then we have seating that would make a prison guard smile. Suspension, cushioning, forget about it. The metal seat of the WC transferred all bumps and shocks straight to the operator's spine. Driving in rough fields became some sort of endurance test, leaving farmers stiff and sore and utterly exhausted after a long day. Even with so many flaws, the Alice Chalmers Model WC became a very important link in the mechanization of farming in America. But for those who had to wrestle with its bone-rattling ride and painful kickback, it was one tractor that required as much grit from its operator as it gave in performance. Case IH Model CC, a frustrating workhorse with overheating woes. In the late 1920s, Case tried ambitiously to enter the row crop tractor market with the Case IH Model CC. It had some power and was reasonably versatile, thus making it a good competitor for its time. But even with all those advantages, this tractor ended up being infamous for design flaws and mechanical headaches that would frustrate farmers. One of the foremost complaints was the clumsy layout of the controls. Contrary to other tractors of the time, the CC had levers and pedals that were arranged in manners not matched to even a beginner's reflexes. The farmers will never stop fumbling with gear shifting and clutch engaging that is deliberately made obtuse by this design. It has reasonable logic, a system designed for new operators substituted with an old operator's instinct defeats itself. Then there were the overheating issues. The Model CC had an earned reputation for being hot in the open, even more so after long hours of work or when used in warm climates. With constant maintenance required by the cooling system, anyone careless, the farmer would watch his tractor crying out for mercy after being overheated and halted in its tracks amid a job. That meant moments wasted on and on, with extra hard work always being required to make the CC work. Needless to say, things got worse with the belt pulley alignment, another weak point on the CC. Powering belt-driven equipment was a common application for the CC, but design flaws kept misaligning such operations. These misalignments caused belts to slip, lose efficiency, and even damage the equipment they were supposed to power. At a time when every minute of working counted, this fault became all the more headache-inducing to the farmers who depended on it for their daily workload. The Case IH Model CC, despite its place in farming history, turned out to be a tractor requiring copious amounts of extra maintenance, extra work, and much patient frustration on the part of its operators. 5. Oliver 70, a stylish disaster on wheels. The Oliver 70 was one of the tractors that seemed to be well ahead in tractor technology at the time of its launch in the late 1930s. Long, sleek, and different from all those boxy utilitarian designs, it was by far the most advanced machine on the market. Farmers who wanted something modern quickly started buying it, only to discover later, once they had started using it, that looking good was not synonymous with being good or even reliable. The system was one major problematic area: the electrical system. The Oliver 70 was infamous for short circuits, dead batteries, and abnormal failures. A farmer could start the machine in the morning, and the ignition would be unserviceable halfway through the job. Some even had to circumvent it entirely and then use temporary fixes for the operation of their machines. Then came the headaches of the fuel system. The Oliver 70 had a very hard-to-deal-with carburetor that required adjustments every so often to keep it running. The job of fieldwork was a nerve-wracking task. If a farmer did not regularly have fine-tuned settings, the engine would either die or run rough from his spottiness. It was jokingly said that owning an Olive 70 made someone a carburetor expert. To top all that off, the tractor had a high center of gravity, which was rather dangerous for uneven ground. On sloping areas of the field, much caution had to be taken. One wrong measurement could mean the tractor would topple over. More than just being an inconvenience, it was dangerous, causing accidents that might have been avoided with engineering. Even with its futuristic looks, the Oliver 70 lived only by being defective machine-wise, which made it more of a liability than an asset. This tractor might have been good for advertising, but out in the fields, it was a completely different thing altogether. 4. Minneapolis Moline. U, a powerful yet uncomfortable workhorse. The Minneapolis Moline U was introduced as a heavy-duty, strong tractor that could take on the tough work that needed doing on the farm. Farmers who needed brute horsepower quickly came calling. This tractor could pull heavy loads with little effort. Unfortunately, however, despite the power, the Minneapolis Moline U had some wonderful design flaws that made it a very frustrating machine to work with. Poor ergonomics was one of the greatest problems. The whole layout of the tractor layout did not extend well for taller operators, forcing them into very uncomfortable and awkward postures while driving. Poor placement of the seat and controls resulted in fatigue after working for long hours in the field. Instead of concentrating on simple work, many farmers spent time trying to adjust themselves to avoid cramps and back pains. Then came the transmission nightmare. The Minneapolis Moline U's faultless reputation stood at variance from other user-friendly tractors of that time. Routine gear shifting took perfect timing, or else the operator was to face grinding gears and jerky movements. New users had an awful time trying to time this right, which turned the experience of driving the tractor quite frustrating. Miss a shift, and you'd either stall out or wreck the transmission, exactly the kind of maneuver you'd like to pull while plowing a field. To make things worse, the fuel system could be unreliable. Farmers often reported sputtering engines and sudden loss of power, especially when running the engine hard or at high speeds. The carburetor was prone to clogging, and the running engine needed constant persistence and fine-tuning to run smoothly. Power-wise, the Minneapolis Moline U proved itself, but with significant trade-offs. In a nutshell, this tractor would give the farmers most probably more headaches than help due to an uncomfortable ride, frustrating transmission, and fuel system reliability. 3. Massey Harris 101, a modern attempt that fell short. The Massey Harris 101 aimed at adding another facet of technology to the convenience of farming. The tractor became one of the very first ones to feature the 6-cylinder engine, which was complemented with higher power than that of many competitors at that time. But this 101 seemed modern by the standards of the day, and modern problems came with it. Such as among the fatal flaws the tractor suffered that were the most common. 6-cylinder engines produced more heat than was possible to be cooled off by the cooling system part. Thus, during the long working hours, the machine operated. Farmers always waited and put off their work to let the tractor cool down. Ignoring this would cause blown head gaskets followed by an expensive repair. Another problem that caused so much frustration was the battery drain. The electrical system was unreliable, leading frequently to dead batteries. Many owners had to resort to hand cranking, which was a little more than an inconvenience. It went a step further and became sheer hard work. This was particularly bad when the frost was still on the ground, for everything revolved around starting the tractor himself and becoming a war with it. Furthermore, the weight distribution of the tractor was very poorly designed. The front end was too light, making it prone to lifting off the ground, especially when pulling heavy loads. The premise of this design made the tractor dangerous because it could either tip over when the front wheels suddenly lift off, or instability is revealed on uneven ground. 2. Ford 8N, a classic with serious quirks. The Ford 8N truly deserves its place as one of the greatest enshrined tractors in history. It was appreciated by many farmers for its simplicity and affordability. However, things could have been a bit easier in owning one. One of the real pains was that there was no real gear range. With its 4 forward gears, the tractor was not becoming very economical for the variation in farming tests. Farmers just had to either go too slow or too fast, making some jobs even harder than they already were. Another problem of the model was the front-mounted distributor, which was highly exposed to dust and moisture. In fact, with water or dust on the engine, misfires and breakdowns would be frequent events, resulting in numerous stops for cleaning and repair. One of the more annoying problems was the failure of hydraulics. The 3-point hitch system, which could have been a large advantage, had this annoying tendency of leaking and up with dying parts. If the hydraulics were inoperative, the tractor couldn't lift implements, rendering it worthless for many farming chores. 1. John Deere Model R. A diesel pioneer with frustrating flaws. A historical achievement was the John Deere Model R, established as the first diesel tractor by John Deere. The design was revolutionary, but it brought along many frustrations. Though it worked marvels by being economical in consumption compared to the gasoline-powered ones, the operation was less user-friendly. The starting system is perhaps the biggest nuisance. Unlike the part in modern diesel tractors that, at the mere twist of a key, would start a knockout diesel engine, Model Rs had to use a separate pony motor, little gasoline engine made for cranking the major diesel engine. This made the operation much longer instead of adding time, effort, and maintenance, typical for cold mornings for a farmer. Another important issue with this tractor was excessive vibrations. The powerful diesel engine shook the whole tractor at such bouts, which often resulted in the loosening of bolts and rattling over time. Operators said that they felt the vibrations even after the long hours spent in the seat. Apart from those 3 problems, the transmission was difficult, especially in cold weather, which meant that it was like wrestling, laboring through each gear shift and putting muscle into the hand, with care not to grind up hair and metal. Although it has hardly failed in the toughest conditions, the R is perhaps colloquially referred to as one of the most irritating tractors in the operation, the best in this respect. While these tractors played important roles in agricultural history, their design flaws and mechanical issues made them a nightmare for farmers. From dangerous hand cranks to unreliable transmissions and frustrating starting systems, each of these machines brought more headaches than convenience. But now we want to hear from you. Have you ever used or seen one of these tractors in action? Maybe you've heard stories from past generations? Share your experiences in the comments below. And if you enjoyed this deep dive, don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating history.